In the late 15th century, the world as Europeans knew it was a much smaller place. Most believe the vast, uncharted Atlantic Ocean, often called the Sea of Darkness, was an impassable barrier. The lucrative trade routes to the east, the source of precious spices and silks, were long, dangerous, and controlled by rival powers. This was the world that an ambitious Genoese mariner named Christopher Columbus sought to change forever. Columbus was a man possessed by an idea, one that many of his contemporaries considered radical, even foolish. He believed the Earth was a sphere, a concept known since antiquity but not widely applied in practical navigation. He calculated, albeit incorrectly, that by sailing west from Europe, one could reach the East Indies much faster than by traveling east around Africa. His theory was simple, daring, and hinged on a gross underestimation of the planet's circumference. For nearly a decade, Columbus lobbied the courts of Europe, seeking a patron to fund his audacious enterprise of the Indies. He was rejected by the Portuguese, the French, and the English. His maps were questioned, his calculations derided. To many, he was a dreamer, a madman chasing a phantom, but Columbus was persistent. His fervent belief in his mission finally found a receptive audience in Spain, with Queen Isabella I of Castile and King Ferdinand II of Aragon. After years of war, Spain was unified and looking to expand its influence and wealth. Isabella and Ferdinand, initially skeptical, saw a potential, albeit risky, opportunity. If Columbus succeeded, Spain would gain a direct trade route to Asia, bypassing its rivals and reaping immense profits. In April 1492, they agreed to sponsor his expedition, granting him the title Admiral of the Ocean Sea and a share of any riches discovered. The stage was set for one of history's greatest gambles. On August 3, 1492, from the port of Palos de la Frontera, Columbus set sail with a fleet of 3 small ships. The flagship, the Santa María, a larger carrack, and 2 smaller, nimbler caravels, the Pinta and the Niña. With a crew of about 90 men, they headed into the unknown. The initial leg of the journey to the Canary Islands was straightforward, but from there, they sailed into uncharted waters, guided only by compass, stars, and Columbus's unwavering conviction. Weeks turned into a month. The crew grew restless, fearful. They had sailed farther west than any European ship before them. The promised land of Asia was nowhere in sight. The vast empty expanse of the Atlantic began to weigh heavily on their minds. Murmurs of mutiny began to spread. Columbus, a masterful leader when he needed to be, used a combination of discipline, promises of wealth, and even a doctored ship's log to maintain morale and keep the expedition pushing forward. He showed them signs of land-floating vegetation, birds flying overhead assuring them they were close. Then, in the early morning hours of October 12, 1492, a lookout aboard the Pinta, named Rodrigo de Triana, shouted the long-awaited words, "Tierra, tierra, land." By the light of dawn, they saw Ita's small flat island, lush with green vegetation. Columbus, clad in armor and carrying the royal standard of Spain, was rowed ashore. He knelt, gave thanks to God, and claimed the island for his patrons, naming it San Salvador. He had not reached Asia, as he believed, but an island in what we now call the Bahamas. He had stumbled upon a new world. The people they encountered were the native Taino. Columbus, still convinced he was in the East Indies, called them Indians, a misnomer that would stick for centuries. He described them as gentle, peaceful, and generous. For the next 3 months, Columbus explored the Caribbean, charting the coasts of Cuba, which he mistook for mainland China, and the island he named Hispaniola, modern-day Haiti, and the Dominican Republic. He searched relentlessly for the grand cities and gold-paved streets, described by Marco Polo, finding instead small villages and modest gold trinkets. The return journey was fraught with peril. On Christmas Eve, the Santa Maria ran aground on a reef off Hispaniola and had to be abandoned. Columbus left behind 39 of his men at a small settlement he named La Navidad, the first European colony in the Americas, promising to return for them. He sailed for Spain on the Niña, accompanied by the Pinta. The 2 ships were separated in a violent storm, and both were nearly lost. But against all odds, Columbus, aboard the tiny Niña, made it back to Spain in March 1493. His arrival was a sensation. He presented Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand with parrots, exotic plants, and a small group of captured Taino people. He brought tales of a paradise ripe for colonization and conversion, and tantalizing, if meager samples of gold. Though he hadn't found a direct route to Japan or China, he had found something else, something arguably more valuable: new lands, new peoples, and a whole new hemisphere for Europe to exploit. The success of his first voyage secured funding for 3 more. Columbus would return to the Americas in 1493, 1498, and 1502. His subsequent voyages were much larger in scale, involving more ships, soldiers, colonists, and priests. He would explore more of the Caribbean, including Puerto Rico and Jamaica, and even touch the mainland of South and Central America. However, these later voyages were also marked by failure, brutality, and disappointment. The settlement of La Navidad was found destroyed, its men killed by the Taino in response to their abuses. Columbus's attempts to establish a profitable colony on Hispaniola were disastrous. He proved to be a poor administrator, and his governance was cruel and ineffective. Under his rule, the native populations were subjected to forced labor, violence, and devastating European diseases to which they had no immunity. Millions would perish in the decades that followed. His relentless quest for gold and his brutal methods led to his arrest and removal from his governorship in 1500. He was sent back to Spain in chains. Though he was later pardoned by the king and queen and allowed to make one final voyage, he never regained his former prestige or power. Christopher Columbus died in 1506, still clinging to the belief that he had found the western passage to Asia. He never understood the true scale or significance of his discovery that he had connected to worlds that had been separate for millennia. The legacy of Columbus is complex and deeply controversial. For centuries, he was celebrated as a heroic discoverer who brought civilization to the New World. But today, his story is viewed through a more critical lens. He is also seen as the initiator of a brutal chapter of colonization, enslavement, and the decimation of indigenous cultures. His voyages unleashed a torrent of exchange of plants, animals, technologies, ideas, and diseases that irrevocably transformed both the Old World and the New. This process, known as the Columbian Exchange, reshaped global ecology, agriculture, and society in ways we still feel today. The story of Christopher Columbus is not just a tale of one man's ambition. It is the story of a pivotal moment in history, a moment of profound and often violent collision between different worlds. It marks the beginning of the modern, interconnected global age, with all its triumphs and tragedies. Understanding his journey, in all its complexity, is essential to understanding the world we inhabit today. Thanks for watching, and be sure to subscribe for more journeys into history.